Hi guys, I just downloaded a ROM for Super Mario Bros. Uh-oh. Let's talk emulation and piracy. There has probably been a time where you wanted to play a game and it wasn't on modern platforms. In your desire to play the game, you probably look it up online alongside original hardware and you see it's ridiculously expensive. And in your burning desire to, play Three Stooges on the NES, you resort to playing the game through computer emulation. Is this okay? For a long time, the general consensus was yes, emulation is perfectly fine for older systems. But in recent years, people have started to get really weird about emulators and emulating older games. There's been this weird vibe online where a bunch of pundits act like playing older games via emulation is piracy. And it brings up a good question. Is it piracy to play old video games? In this video, we're going to talk about this. We're going to go to bat for emulators and talk about why it's perfectly fine to play old games on your PC. So, let's jump in. Look, I'm not a lawyer, so don't take this as legal advice. Emulation versus piracy is something that probably has a bunch of legalese around it, and my definition is more vibes-based, and I'm pretty sure that doesn't hold up in a court of law. So keep that in mind. But in my view, emulation and piracy are two different things. Emulation is defined as the reproduction of the function or action of a different computer, software system, etc. When we are talking about emulation or emulators, a lot of the time we're talking about a computer program. This computer program is designed to run like the original console on your PC. It is completely legal to create an emulator as long as they don't use any copyrighted code. A good example of this is PCSX2. This is a PS2 emulator that plays PS2 ROMs by tricking the game into thinking it's running on native hardware. Piracy, on the other hand, is taking a product that is readily available and stealing it via download on the internet so that you don't have to pay for it. A good example of this would be checking out Baldur's Gate 3's Steam page. You see it's too high of a price and you don't want to pay for it, so you torrent it from the Pirate Bay or something. Keep in mind, the keyword here is readily available. If a video game is available on most major storefronts or easily purchased, you probably should buy it. In my mind, emulation and downloading ROMs is a way to preserve the history of the games industry for those games that are not readily available on those storefronts. Emulation is a way of preserving these lost games that will not be brought to modern platforms. Video game companies have done a terrible job of preserving their legacy. A great example of this is the 3DS. Nintendo has not only stopped making 3DSs, but they have closed the original digital storefront. Now, many of these 3DS games can only exist through emulation. Because of this, I see absolutely no problem with emulating 3DS content. The company cannot make money off of that storefront anymore, and they have decided that they do not care about a lot of that software by not supporting it. So then it is up to us, the community, to preserve it via emulation and ROMs. In my mind, when companies disregard large portions of their back catalog like this, it becomes perfectly fine to emulate because they're not doing any preservation. They are not making their products readily available. The company that does this does not care to preserve their back catalog, so ultimately it becomes up to the individual to preserve these pieces of art. It becomes an act of preservation rather than stealing current-gen products. So if I'm a big video game company, why don't I just throw my entire back catalog up on a modern storefront? The answer, sadly, is commercial viability. So think about it. I'm Nintendo. As a publicly traded company, I am on the stock market, and it is my responsibility to my shareholders to make as much money as possible quarter over quarter. I look at a game like The Three Stooges for NES. This is a game that isn't currently available on modern platforms. Am I going to take the time and effort to figure out the rights to this game, rip the NES ROM, ROM and throw it up on my marketplace and promote it. No! The reason why so many of these games are trapped on inaccessible platforms is because there is not enough financial incentive from these large, money-hungry corporations to preserve their past. Think about it like this. If I'm PlayStation, I don't just want to make $50,000 off of a PS2 game that wasn't accessible. I want to spend that time and make $100 million off of a big commercial product. Sadly, these companies do not see any financial incentive in preservation because it does not make the most amount of money all the time. With this, we find ourselves in an awkward situation where classic games only exist on modern platforms if a company deems there is enough profit to be made from existing on that platform. It makes sense from a business perspective, but from a preservation perspective, this just sucks. Look, is the Three Stooges for NES a good video game? No. But I do think when we're talking about old video games and preserving art, there is an argument to be made that the Three Stooges for NES deserves to exist preserved somewhere. I believe video games have a right to exist in perpetuity. It doesn't matter whether or not they were of quality or whether or not it is even profitable. When companies do not care to preserve the history of our industry, it's only natural people will want to break copyright law just so something can keep existing. And look, I know what you're thinking. Stanky, PlayStation and Nintendo have done a great job at preserving their back catalogs through streaming services. Look, stuff like Nintendo Switch Online and PlayStation Premium Classics are a step in the right direction, but they're really not interested in games preservation. Again, we come back to this idea of commercial viability. These services like Switch Online or PlayStation Plus exist to drip feed classic games into the catalog, slowly trickling out these old releases so these games have the most pop and market value and they become commercially viable because they can stand out. Again, this makes sense from a business perspective, but from a preservation perspective, this sucks. These services should just have all of these old games. If I'm a PlayStation Plus subscriber, I should be able to play every console's major release from PlayStation 1 all the way to PlayStation 3. I do not believe that retro video games only have a right to exist when they can be a marketing beat for somebody's subscription service. It's just kind of a disgusting way to look at art. I do want to reiterate here at the end that if a video game exists on a modern marketplace and you're interested in it, you should probably buy that game. We need to support developers and companies that are doing the right thing by making their software accessible on modern storefronts. I also want to say that I do not agree with piracy, as ultimately it's the developers that get hurt when you steal their games. They're the first ones to be laid off when Q3 profits aren't high. I say all this to say emulation is essential. Frankly, the modern video game industry wants to rest on the shoulders of greatness, of the retro games and retro consoles of the past. But they do not want to make these retro games, these masterpieces, accessible because they do not see value in preserving the classics. Anything that is old and cannot make the maximum amount of money, to these companies is seen as just worthless. These video game companies would rather these files languish on an old computer somewhere than allow you to play them on a modern console. It drives me nuts to see people equate emulation with piracy, when in reality, a lot of these emulation communities just want to see these older games live on and be accessible in some fashion, regardless of what their modern market value may be. Art should not be swiped from the record because it was determined not to be financially viable. It should not be swept from the record because a company can't use it as a marketing beat. And look, I get it. It's not always practical for a company to put every single game on their service. There are rights issues, and everything you do does cost time and money. But I also don't think it's necessarily practical to host these great video games of all time on these backwater ROM and pirate sites. We almost need a sort of digital video game library where these emulators could be hosted in the cloud and people could check out these games and try to experience them for the first time. But sadly, whenever this type of preservation comes up in the courts, the platform holders always push against it because in their mind, protecting their IP is paramount, even if they're not going to do anything with it. ultimately we're left with a situation where I do not feel bad telling you to emulate that old video game. As I see it, continuing the legacy of gaming, continuing the legacy of retro gaming is far more valuable than any value these companies put on their back catalog software. Emulation is not piracy, it is preservation. Video game companies, sort it out. Remember, this channel is home to stinky opinions. Love what you saw? Hate what you saw? Drop a comment down below. And why not subscribe if you enjoyed the show? Thanks for me, Stanky, the CEO.